the reasons that people should be getting your amazing books on June 2nd. Bethany, you want to go?
Okay, so
There's
I'm
got
the author
amazing
of
books
A
coming out
Song
on
Below
June
Water,
2nd.
if you can see
So
my
I'd like
pretty
to have all
girl.
of you guys
And this is a story about
and
Tavia
yourselves,
and Effie, two
and
sister
tell
friends who are
us
living in
why
Portland, Oregon.
all the reasons that
And
people should be
they
getting your
live in an
amazing books
alternate sort
on
of
June 2nd.
PDX where it's much weirder. So
Bethany, you want to
Portland
go?
has a
Okay,
saying, keep
so
it
there's
real.
got amazing books
And
coming out on
this
June
is
2nd.
weirdly
So
rich
I'd
poetry
like to
as
have all of
possible.
you guys
And there's
and
a
this is a
magic
story
tree
about
and
Tavia and
elves
Effie,
live
two sister
amongst
friends who are living in
and
Portland, Oregon.
Tavia
All the
has
reasons that
decided
people should be
her
getting your
sister friends are only Black women, which means that instead of it being romantic and desirable,
people should be getting
there's
your
some
amazing books
alternates
on June
presented. And Effie is a cosplayer
PDX
way.
where it's
And it's so
Bethany, you want to go?
has a
Okay,
saying, keep
so
it
there's
real.
got amazing books coming out on June 2nd. So I'd like to have all of you guys
That is, so she is trying to figure that out without sort of losing her sanity, and at the same time, of course, supporting her sister Tavia. And it's really about the life-saving qualities of Black sisterhood. So that is why everyone should read this book.
Hi, I'm E.K. Johnson, and I have Queen's Peril out on June 2nd. It is a Star Wars book starring Padme Amidala and the Handmaiden, and a few other familiar characters. It covers the time period from just after Padme is elected Queen of Naboo until about 3 days after Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral. So it's busy time. It will be good for fans of the book, or fans of the movie rather, fans of Queen's Shadow, and people who kind of wanted a little bit more on what makes Naboo tick and how Padme works with the Handmaiden group.
So I'm Roseanne A. Brown, and I'm the author of A Song of Wraiths and Ruin. The final copies just came, and they're very shiny, so shiny. And so this is a YA fantasy novel, also out June 2nd, and it's set in a world inspired by West African folklore. And it follows two protagonists. One of them is a refugee named Malik, and the other is a princess named Karina. So Malik, when his younger sister is kidnapped by a vengeful spirit, he makes a deal for her freedom, but if he can kill Karina, the crown princess. So he enters a contest to win her hand in marriage to get close to her to kill her. But he doesn't know that Karina's mother, the queen, has just died. And so she is only holding this contest so that she can sacrifice her future husband for a spell that will bring her mother back to life. So it's a dual POV. It follows both of them as like across 1 week of this festival as they're trying to sort of outmaneuver each other without really realizing what the other one is up to. And I think it'll be great for fans, people who love fantasy romance, high fantasy, and who just really like kind of like adventure novels starring Black kids.
And necromancy.
Oh, and necromancy. Always forget that one.
I'm Kester Grant, and actually I remember Roseanne's book. I read a super early version in Pitch Wars, and it was so good. I'm so excited. I can't wait actually to read the new version, but I live on a tiny island far away from everyone, and it'll take like 7 years for it to arrive over here. I read a book called The Court of Miracles. I don't have a version to show you because nothing arrives now. We're on strict lockdown. Court of Miracles is a retelling of Les Miserables, and with like Jungle Book elements mashed up into it. If you've ever thought that Eponine deserved a better story, then this is basically the book for you. And it's for fans of Six of Crows, The Lies of Locke Lamora, and I've forgotten the name of the book by Roshni. Gilded Wolves. There we go. Super good with my comps, guys.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about world building for a second, because a couple of you have familiar worlds already. What is that process like for you for world building? How much do you take from lore or reality that has already been established, and how much do you put into it yourselves?
With A Song Below Water, I think because Portland is a real place, I'm either going to get people who are like, well, that doesn't sound like Portland, or people being like, well, this isn't fantasy, it's just Portland. So I'm looking forward to the spectrum of responses. I definitely add places, even when I set something in a real setting, like in a real world setting. I'm never really satisfied with that. And I also want to have sort of really places where something really significant happens. I don't always want to set that in a real location. I don't want people worrying over, is that the layout of this place or is that really? So I do tend to make new locations even when I set it in a real place. So there's a childhood sort of disaster that happens to Effie where she's playing Red Rover with her friends, and then she basically is the only kid to leave that park that day. And so I created something called Triton Park. I'm not even sure if I like tell you where in the city you should be able to find it. There are plenty of high schools in Portland, but I was like, I have to make up a high school because this is an Aloco sort of hotbed. And that is really the majority of where my world building actually comes from for this book, is the lore and the mythology, the mythos. And I didn't really actually use any existing mythos. So obviously, if you have heard anybody talk about it, there are sirens in this book, but they're land-dwelling women. So there's no connection to mermaids. They don't have a tail, any of that sort of thing. It is literally a Black woman with the power of voice. And then there's Aloco, which is, I keep saying obviously inaccurate, but I guess it's not obvious if you're not familiar with Boloko. So Aloco in my book is completely divorced from the actual Central African origin story of Boloko, which are sort of small tree-dwelling cannibalistic things that sort of use these sort of like bell sounds to attract their prey, who then they eat. And that is absolutely not what they are in the book. And that's on purpose. And I've talked about this a couple of times because as a diaspora author of fantasy, I am doing sort of a telephone effect where you're thinking, how did it evolve to this, to what you see in the book, which is really Aloco are sort of like the most popular of all of the magical creatures. Like they are the ones that everybody wants to be. They are the ones that get all of the attention. Sort of the mean girl sort of character in the book is Aloco. So my world building is deciding how I want to use mythos and making it, building my world, my real city around that.
That sounds so fascinating. Every time you talk about this book, I just like move it higher up my
I thought you'd be reading it right now. Actually,
I am. I'm reading them both
like
right now. I'm like frantically getting pages. No, it's charging. So writing Naboo in a lot of ways is like getting a puzzle box, like from 1999, that people randomly added pieces to for like 10 years. And then, so there's extra pieces in the puzzle box, and then there's no picture on the box. There's just all these pieces. And then you pour the pieces out and you try to like create a functioning government off of like the 2-page spread in the visual dictionary where they don't have a minister of finance. And so a lot of that it was kind of fun because on one hand, it was like, I get to build a planet in Star Wars that everybody already loves. But on the other hand, it was just like, George, would it have killed you to come up with like anybody who wasn't an artist on this planet? So it was fun, but it was definitely a different style of world building than I'm used to. And I think my fan fiction background came in quite handy there because I'm used to sort of like, that's how I learned to write, was going into already existing worlds and like rounding them out a little bit. And so getting to do that on the Star Wars scale is incredible, obviously, but it was also super fun. And I enjoyed it, even though like, I don't think the Minister of Agriculture should have that much power, but they're the only official person I have. So here we are.
So I guess for me, I knew when I started the book that I wanted to base it with West African cultures because I am from Ghana, But I also knew from the start I didn't want to work with just Ghanaian cultures, simply because like I wanted to create like an entire like continent world, and I wanted to like basically I just wanted to make my life difficult apparently, because I was like I want it to be big. And so I decided I wasn't going to do all of Africa because that is just way out of my scale zone. But I was like, I'm very fascinated by sort of the trans-Saharan trade route between North Africa and West Africa, because that's such a portion of African history that has so many of the cool ancient kingdoms like the Songhai Empire, Mali, ancient Ghana. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to use this as my base, and using that as a base, I want to create a culture that feels like it would be like in line with the cultures during the sort of 11th century time period of that area. And so kind of my intention was always, I didn't necessarily want to write an straight African fantasy in the sense like this is Africa but with magic, but I wanted it to feel sort of like a folk tale, sort of like fairy tale world, like in the way that when you hear something like Little Red Riding Hood, it's not technically exactly like Germany or France or wherever that specific tale comes from, but like anyone who reads it can tell it's based in Europe. So I wanted something that felt like, oh, people could see this is where the African inspiration comes from, but it's still its own thing with its own rules, with its own society and gods and myths. Like I was even made sure all of the gods in the book are made up. I've had that question before, like, oh, where can I learn more about this religion? I'm like, you can't, because there's only what I put on the page. But because I was very clear, I'm like, I don't want to make any commentary on any real African spiritual traditions, whether positive or negative. I was like, I want to create something that draws inspiration and is inspired by that, but that's its own thing entirely, so that I could do whatever I wanted with it. So I guess that was how I approached that, like clear, intentional, and hopefully respectful inspiration, but still its own sort of separate thing that I could play around with.
So the Court of Miracles is an alternate history. So there's no actual magic in it. But I'm a big fantasy reader, and I didn't just want to do a straight retelling, which would read like a alternate history adventure. And I took a look at some of my favorite fantasy books and said, okay, what do I love in these things? And I literally just made a list. So I like factions or Harry Potter houses or the families in Game of Thrones. I love the mottos they have. I love the hierarchies and the laws. I just made this whole list of things, and I started to think about what creates a culture. And I had changed some things in the history. In Court of Miracles, the French Revolution had failed. So the royals were still on the throne, and they had seen what the people had been about to do with them, which, if you don't know your history, is incredibly violent and bloody. So they were like out for vengeance and really paranoid about anyone trying to overthrow them again. But I had written that the main people, the actual miracle court, is this underworld criminal society, a bit like what we would call mafia today. And I wanted them to feel like a fantasy world full of magic and things would feel. And so I went super deep into what makes culture and where do our expressions and things come from, things that we don't even like realize. That like, why do we shake hands? Why do we say good morning? Why do we say bless you when you sneeze? You know, why do we, a lot of our oaths and curses come from religion. We talk about the devil and about God. We don't even notice it. Everything is based, or a lot of it's based in religion or in historical events. And so I wanted to create something which felt completely different to what normal people in France would be living and saying and doing. And I just created an entirely different culture with an entirely different origin point that was based in a historical period. At one point, they needed to clear up the city. The first police chief of Paris, I think his name was Nicolas de la Reine, he needed to clean up the city. And he just took all of the poor people in the slums, a lot of them were criminals, a lot of them weren't, and he stuck them in jail or in hospitals where they couldn't get out, just saying. So I took this event as like it's almost like a traumatic attempt at erasing a whole portion of the population. And they banded together in this time, and they believed that as a people, they were born in that time. And so all of the mythos, all of the things that they swear by, what we would say are, you know, our gods or our religion or this or that, is actually the founding members of the miracle court and that era that set up laws and a strict hierarchy to protect one another, and also so that their crime could flourish. So, yeah.
I'm so glad you brought up hierarchy, because literally that's my next question. you all have crafted such incredible social hierarchies that work in different ways from our world, obviously. And I wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit about those. If you could sort of talk about how your main character or characters fit into that and how that influences the journey that they go on, how their position at the beginning sort of leads to their journey throughout.
So mine, I think, is probably the most intentionally based on the real world, because the entire premise of the book is that sirens only being Black women makes it a dangerous thing to be, and makes it a despised thing to be. So one of our two main characters, Tavia, is a siren. Her entire world, her entire life is about keeping that secret. So within the Black community, there is a network that is a smaller, it's, you know, it's like a group within a group. It's a smaller group of people who are aware of the sirens in their geographical location and who are committed to saving them from being revealed. And because it's within the Black community, one of the people in her network who goes to school with her is actually a Black girl who's in Iloko, which of course means that now there's this sort of overlap between these two groups. And Iloko are, I wanted the most privileged and most desirable group to be a non-Western origin. So the Iloko in this book are the ones that are the most, like, people move to, there's part of the mythos where they're ancestral spirits, and that is something that's from the original mythos. But because of that, there are places that you would think this will increase my chances of having an Iloko child, of my child being an Iloko. And so Portland becomes sort of a hotbed for Iloko births, which is why they have this high school, which is named after the first Iloko president, which has the highest number of Iloko students of any of the high schools in PDX. And it sort of becomes like a chicken or the egg thing where you can't figure out what is actually making this happen. But everybody, of course, loves that this is happening. So they are the hometown celebrities and heroes and everything. And of course, in a world where you're watching Black girls be brutalized, even as a Black girl who is an Iloko, I think it's very reasonable and understandable that Naima, which is the name of the Black girl who's the Iloko, chooses her Iloko-ness as her shield, because this is the most sought after, desirable, beloved thing you can be. And if people don't know she's an Iloko, they might think she's a siren. So she really, really leans into that identity, and at the same time is still involved in the network that protects sirens, but not from any like place of, I particularly love Tavia or anything. So you have a really, really obvious hierarchy, but it's also exactly like in our real world where it's a really obvious hierarchy that most people can pretend they don't even see, which is where all of the gaslighting comes in, because this is working flawlessly and perfectly for generations. It's not us making it work. It's not sirens making this hierarchy work. So that's the frustration and the tension and that I literally live with, and the misogynoir that I literally live with is the entire basis, the entire, you know, genesis of this book and of the hierarchies in the book. And I do try to deal with the complicated ways that identities and intersections can overlap, and what their limitations might be, and why people might choose, and I'm speaking only of the actually marginalized, but why people might choose their alliances and their allegiances, and whether it's fair to I guess to criticize that. I'm sort of, if I'm being honest, we're sort of sliding into the follow-up book with this because the next book, which is not a sequel or anything, but it's sort of a companion, is from Naima's perspective. So I'm kind of maybe going a little bit into that in my explanation, but that hierarchy is absolutely apparent in the book, and it's sort of to Tavia's detriment, to Tavia and Effie's, particularly because Effie doesn't know what she is. So in a world where the worst thing you can be is something that Black women are all assumed to be, it would honestly be better to know what you are. To know if you're Siren or if you're something else that you can tell people so that you know where you fit. And that's the difficult part for Effie, is she has no idea where in this world she actually fits.
Naboo, in a lot of ways, is like the perfect government, if such a thing exists. And of course, it's not even perfect in the movies, but the way that the people on Naboo respect their government has always been the ideal. So even though the government's not perfect, everybody treats the idea of it as such. So a lot of it operates by mutual consent. And they just, democracy is almost their religion. Like they all kind of keep to it. And it works because nobody ever does anything terrible. Someone's about to, but and it all gets real fast after that, and then they end up with the Moff system in Star Wars, the regional governors and Palpatine overseeing the whole thing. So they're about to have someone take advantage of their government system, and in Queen's Peril and the Phantom Menace, we really sort of see the inner workings of that. How Palpatine was kind of able to be like, I can get away with literally anything because nobody's ever tried, and sort of uses Naboo as his like test case in a lot of ways for what's going to happen later with the Empire. And one of the things I have always found interesting about that situation is that even after, like in the post rebellion phase of the Star Wars universe, Naboo doesn't go right back to the way it was, but it goes back to having the same ideals. Like they don't let themselves get sort of fenced in and, we have to be at least a little bit totalitarian to avoid future totalitarianism, which is definitely a privileged thing that not everybody can do. And it doesn't work on every planet. But that's one of the things I really like about Naboo, is that they're, as a people, relatively committed to being decent to each other. And that extends to their government. So obviously, I love writing the good guys. Nobody is surprised to hear this. So I love writing people who fight to make the system work, and change it if they have to, but to make it work for everybody, and to just be good, who wake up every morning and are just like, you know what, I'm going to do good stuff today. I love writing that kind of thing. So in a lot of ways, for me, Naboo is very like therapeutic. And I just have to be careful that I don't make it too like cotton candy. I have to give it some teeth every once in a while. But aside from that, it's kind of nice to write a planet where people just work hard and do their jobs.
Gosh, I wish a society where people just were like, who did the right thing and like were willing to critique the system, didn't feel like a fantasy. So hats off to you for that, because we need more of that. But so I guess for A Song of Wraiths and Ruin, what fascinates me most about hierarchy is kind of the way it's used to create and uphold power structure, and the way that like the way power is viewed and how who has power and who doesn't changes based on where they are in different hierarchies. So even with Karina and Malik, like at first glance, like Karina is literal royalty, Malik is a refugee. Like on a societal level, they are at extreme opposite ends of the hierarchy of society, with Karina obviously with a lot more power than Malik has. But then you introduce the magic system into it. In the world of the book, there are 7 deities who decide what kind of magic a person has based on the day of the week they're born. And so Malik, everyone knows what their alignment is, though whether or not you develop magic is pretty random. So Malik pretty early on like develops his, and suddenly he is thrust with a lot more power that his power magic gives him. And suddenly now in these situations, he has more power than Karina in ways that he didn't have access to before. And then even within the hierarchy, there are certain other factions and certain branches that I can't get into without spoiling. but that have a lot of historical sort of basis. Like there was a whole group of people who, as soon as they developed magic, they immediately started to oppress other people. And so people do not like being oppressed. So for that, Malik now has to navigate that, because now he has all this power, but with a lot of baggage that comes with it. And so even within scenes within the book, we sort of see how in one scene, Karina can have more power than Malik, while in another scene, it flip-flops just based on their environment and based on what's happening. And I really wanted the reader to sort of question, like, what does power truly look like? When do you have it? How do you navigate a situation where you had no power and suddenly you have all this power? Versus when you're used to having power for something you didn't earn, like Karina, like she was born into it, she didn't actually earn it. How do you like ethically handle that? And even then, how do you ethically handle having power that might not actually be from a good source, that you are aware you don't deserve and probably shouldn't use, but the alternative is you're going back to being powerless and being brutalized for that, and you also don't want that to happen to you. And so I wanted to avoid a sort of like, there's no real good or evil guy in the book. Like there is a primary antagonist who has a whole bunch of issues on their own, but like in a broad sense, there's no these people are good, these people are bad. There's just sort of different ways magic manifests, and then different contexts manifest in, because I really wanted the reader to think sort of like, how is it changing, how's it morphing, how might it resemble ways we see power constructed in our own world, and things we sort of don't question because that's just the way it's always been, and kind of think like, in what ways do I have power, in what ways don't I have power, and how do I navigate that? So that's, I guess, how I wanted to use hierarchy in my book.
There are obvious hierarchies in place in the France that existed, and especially, of course, if the revolution didn't succeed, then the royal family is still there. And Les Miserables is famous for basically illustrating the terrible, terrible extravagance of the nobility and the rich compared to the suffering of the poor. But what was more interesting to me, because those are things already cooked in to any sort of Les Miserables retelling, no matter where you said it, that's always going to be, it's kind of what makes Les Miserables Les Miserables. But what I wanted to do was to look at something a little different, which is that, as I said, the Miracle Court were created when 9 lords and ladies, well, they were just people, these men and women came together and decided on rules that would govern to protect one another. And it turned into guilds. So now you've got your guild of assassins, guild of thieves, your guild of beggars, your guild of whatever. And they have a very strict law and hierarchy. Your first allegiance is to your guild and to your guild lord, not to any family member that you might have. There is no marriage in the Miracle Court. So even if you're madly in love with this person over there, your loyalty is to your guild. Your second loyalty is to the Miracle Court as a whole, and endangering that either by exposing the Miracle Court to outsiders or by bringing war between the guilds. That's the worst thing that you could possibly do. And I was really interested in the idea of this law being created to protect these people. And in the history, the main antagonist you have in the story his name is the Tiger, and he is the head of the Guild of Human Trafficking. So he traffics women in horrific ways. And his origin story is that he was a young boy and traffickers came in from outside and took him. And the guilds were meant to protect him, but they didn't, because they were afraid of the nations, not nations, but the quantity of ships full of slavers, full of traffickers all around the world that could rise up and just crush them in a second. So they had to choose between one boy and all-out war with traffickers from all over the world. And so they let him be taken. And so he returns to bring up this big paradox, which is that they broke the law, which is the thing that binds them, you see. So in a way, he speaks often and he says that he is the twisting of the law. And that idea actually comes from something I heard once about the Bible. It's in the Bible, and it says that the law itself cannot make man perfect, but it can only reveal man's weaknesses and their injustice. And I thought that was so interesting, because in our minds, we think a law that's meant to protect people is actually meant to keep everyone good and everyone safe, you know? So Nina Eponintanadia, the hero of Court of Miracles, comes against this trafficker, and she is obsessed with the law. The law is the only thing that makes sense and brings normalcy to a life which is full of terrible violence and terrible suffering. And she is holding close to that, and at the same time is faced with the fact that the people that run her family, the Miracle Court, everyone around her, it's somehow broken and flawed. And of course, it's a trilogy, so it's a 3-book series, and it's one of the questions that I wanted to expand on into further books, which is what do you do to protect your people? What if the 2 choices that you have to protect them are both bad choices that are going to have really terrible consequences? What do you do? You know, you could make a good choice that could plunge everyone you know into war, or you could protect someone you love. And I mean, you know, this kind of interplay between what is right when 2 things are right, and they can both cause a terrible wrong. Yeah, I guess that's it.
I didn't know it was a trilogy. Now I have to like go get some pieces of my heart back.
So one of the questions, when I first started moderating, when I was a bookseller, one of the go-to questions that I always had was about titles, because I always think it's such an interesting thing, because it's like picking a name for a dog or for a baby, right? It's like, what if I pick the wrong thing? Like, what if it doesn't fit? And so did you have other titles that you had thought about? Did picking a title feel like pulling teeth and you had to go back and forth with editors and agents? Kate, if the answer is Star Wars, what to name it, you can pick one of your other books that you didn't have given to you, because I don't know. So how did the title come about?
It's kind of both. Queen's Shadow was a title I picked because I didn't want them to call it Star Wars Amidala or Star Wars Padme. So I was like, we're going to call it Queen's Shadow. I wrote like 3 lines into the book specifically referring to the Queen's Shadow so that they would take it, and they did. And then they asked me to write another one, and I was like, crap, what's another word that goes with Queen? So I originally had gone with Queen's Gambit, which is a chess strategy by which you like maneuver the queen around so that she's a distraction, which works pretty well. But marketing did not go for that. So we ended up with Queen's Peril instead, which actually, Gambit is a very strange word. Like, I love it, but it's a very, very strange word. Whereas Peril kind of like immediately gets you into like peril on the sea, like all that kind of stuff. So I was quite pleased with the change. And it happened early enough that I don't really like ever go to call the book Queen's Gambit, like, because that happens sometimes when you retitle a book. But so yeah, it was kind of both. We tossed around a lot of words, and Peril was the one we came up with.
I love Gambit. I love that word. I tend to apparently really have an affinity for words that marketing is like, don't do that. So with A Song Below Water, basically I just wanted to make sure that me and Rosie had the same beginning to our title. So A Song Below Water, when I sold it, I had what I told them was a placeholder title. I was like, this is not the title. Please do not try to make this the title. It was The Sound and the Stone. And for me, it was, again, it was just a placeholder. I knew it was just a placeholder. I was not attached to it. And I was actually really upset when my editor was like, we kind of like, I was like, absolutely not. We already talked about this. You cannot use that title. And first of all, it sounds very sort of like sword fantasy. And I was like, this book is contemporary fantasy and very much about social justice, social injustice and stuff. So The Sound and the Stone sounds like The Sword and the Stone to me. So anyway, I was very adamant, like, you cannot do this. But this is the first time anybody has asked this question, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you the actual truth. A Song Below Water is basically like, fine, whatever. Because my agent and I had what I think are some of the dopest titles that basically what you're going up against is like, of course, Tor is like a fantasy science fiction publisher. They have a very like identifiable brand. And for me, the most important aspect of the story is the entire conceit, which is misogynoir, like the suffocating oppressiveness of misogynoir. So in terms of so basically for us to try to come to a marriage where it's like, okay, it has to have some level of fantasy to it. And I was like, but I sort of want it to be either lyrics from Lemonade or like a seat at the table or like some sort of freedom song from the civil rights movement or something. So I'm coming up with like lyrics that have to do with that. Or I will say that what I really wanted was like a conversational title. Now I have to obviously say asterisks. I love A Song Below Water. I actually really, really love it, but there was no way that I was going to love it at the time because I was just so done with the conversation. So the title that I was like, this is it, like this is the title, because I wanted something conversational. I wanted something sort of long, and it was a direct quote. The only problem was that it's a quote from a Black man instead of a Black woman, which of course would have been the most perfect, but it was something Jesse Williams said on stage where he said, just because we're magic doesn't mean we aren't real. And I was like, that's it. That's the title. Like, what are you talking about? That's so dope. And they were like, but if you had to have a second choice, and I was like, okay, you're dead to me. So that's like the nicest way of being like, that's not the title. And then we went, I think that Victoria, my agent, actually came up with Oh We Hiss and Holler, which I was like, dude, that is such a freaking perfect, and it's not going to make sense why it's so perfect until you read the book, but I'm like, that is such a perfect title. And they were like, that's cool. So it was just a lot. It was a lot to come to this, which was really strange for me because my first book, Mem, I had originally called it Keepsake. The publisher was like, here's a reason that we don't know if Keepsake is the right one, and it totally made sense, although I totally gave them a hard time about it jokingly. They didn't know I was joking, which was so funny. The actual thing that happened is like I was speaking to the publisher Chris on the phone, and he was saying, hey, the only note that we have is like him calling her Keepsake makes it seem like it's not as emotional of a relationship as it is, and so we were wondering if you would change it to something else. And I was like, well, actually I named it Keepsake because my godfather called me Keepsake my entire life until he died, which is a true story, by the way. And then like the phone call went completely silent. And then he was like, it was actually Olivia who suggested that you change the title. And I was like, Chris, I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. I don't have a problem with changing the title. So we changed it to Mem, which obviously is like a word that I created in the book. And by the time the book gets published, even your own lexicon, your original lexicon, seems so familiar that you forget that it is new to other people. So I was like, oh, we can't call it Mem. Everybody will be like, oh, that's so trite. And of course, nobody knows what Mem is. I was actually happy to end up back at Mem, but that was a much more fun process of titling than A Song Below Water.
A Song Below Water always makes me think of those the statues in the Caribbean that are that you scuba dive to, like that. Yes. As soon as that's what it always makes me think of.
Yeah. Which I did love. Yeah.
On the bright side, you've got like 9 taglines that work now.
I know. Seriously, I was like, I had an entire email of what I think are straight bangers, and like I was so confused every time marketing would be like, we can't do that. I'm like, just tell me what you want, basically, because I'm super over this.
I want to hear the straight banger sometime, Bethany. I'd love to hear that. So Kit actually mentioned earlier this was originally a Pitch Wars book, and I'm so sorry you had to read that version. That version is dead to me. It does not exist. But I bring that up because the version, the original working title for this back when I came up with the idea was originally Dusk Before Dawn, right? And I thought I liked it. It was cute. It was short. It had like symbolic meaning and all this stuff. Like it had like the flip-flopping in there. And then I think it was my agent, Curisa. She was like, Rosie, I feel like no one's going to know what this means. I'm like, you're not necessarily wrong on that, but I still like it. Also, I think Zayn Malik had just released his new album that was like From Dusk Till Dawn, so there was just a lot of concern with that. So thanks, Zayn. But so they're like, the problem is I think it was also a little too contemporary-ish, and like I have the opposite problem you have, Bethany. I had a contemporary title for like a high fantasy, so they're like, we need something that they really wanted something with a sort of a rhythm to it, because like you mentioned, like high fantasy tends to have more sort of like longer titles with strong imagery to them. And so there's with the caveat that like right now, an X of X and X is a title structure that a lot of YA readers have rightfully pointed out comes up a lot. Like probably I think if there's anything I've gotten a lot of flack for the book, even more than the actual content of the book, is the fact that like, oh, I'm done with an X of X, X titles, which I'm like, you know what? That's fair. That's your opinion. Do what you want. But they're like, what we're doing, they're like, we really think we want to go with like a blank cover, because we're like, it makes it clear kind of what people are getting into with the book. I was like, okay, sure, let's go. And so we were just throwing words and ideas on what's the book about, blah, 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 blah. Like they had a whole list of things like, here are recurring images in the book, make something that works. I was like, oh man. And so Song of Wraiths and Ruin, it wasn't even necessarily like the first thing I came up with. It was just like, okay, here's a list of different combinations of words that kind of make sense. Do with it what you want. And they're like, A Song of Wraiths and Ruin, we like this one. Also, everyone really likes that it has war in the little acronym ASOWAR, which is just very cute. And has the alliteration, has the rhythm, and it had the imagery. And they're like, we're going with this one. I was like, coolio. Because I've never been someone for who titles are a big deal breaker to me, mostly because I don't fully get how they work. But so when they were happy with it, I was happy with it because, like you said, Bethany, I was done. So I was like, you know what? If everyone's happy, I'm happy. Let's go.
I just feel like I've just had such an easy time because my titles were like, I was just like, this is what it's called. And they were like, okay. I did A Court of Miracles was, why was it A Court of Miracles rather than the Miracle Court? I don't know. It sounded more poetic, more like high fantasy-ish type thing. But then it was originally called A Court of Miracles, right? To get super pedantic. And it got on Goodreads when they announced the book back in the day. Many years ago, guys. It was like 4 years ago. But anyways, and all these things appeared on Goodreads. People going like, oh, Sarah J. Maas has got a new book. And I'm like, my name is clearly not Sarah J. Maas. And they were like, and then they were like, I didn't want to add this to my TBR list because I don't like Sarah J. Maas. Or I thought this was part of the Court of Thorns and Roses series. And I got excited, but I don't know who this author is, so I don't like it anymore. So I kind of, I feel like maybe people in my publishing team never go on Goodreads because I had to send them this list of like, these are 25 examples of people who have made a Sarah J. Maas comment. Maybe we should just change A to the. So now it's The Court of Miracles. And the sequels, it just fits. I find titles really easy. I don't know why. And again, maybe my editor is super chill because even I've got a middle grade coming out next year called Golden Paw. And I was like, it's called Golden Paw. And they were like, yay. So I don't know. Sorry. Your stories of suffering are hilarious though. And and the version I read in Pitch Wars was really good, by the way. Like, don't be like this.
That makes me feel better because usually I tell the story that everyone's like, "Oh, I hate you," whereas I'm like, "Don't! I just had an easy break this time." So this is the first time this has ever happened to me, where we're on a panel and I'm not the one with like the cakewalk story.
My mem, I feel like my mem was the cakewalk. It was just so funny that I got to totally terrify my publisher because I was like, I genuinely don't care, but I don't know if anybody knows me. I can argue about anything. So like. It doesn't mean that it bothers me or that I care. It just means I saw an opening and I took it.
Obviously, there are more than just these 4 books coming out on June 2nd. So do you have any others that you know of that you want people to also check out?
Well, now that I know You Should See Me in a Crown is June 2nd. Isn't it Leah Johnson? Is Johnson Leah's last name? Yes, I am extremely excited about that book and very excited to have been corrected on the date because I would have been sitting here twiddling my thumbs thinking it hadn't come out yet. So You Should See Me in a Crown. Very excited about that one.
The 3rd book in Amy Kaufman's Ice Wolf trilogy comes out on June 2nd as well. It's a middle grade. Also, Amy's Amy's okay. When I was reaching out to people, I was like, Amy can handle it. I'm gonna find some people who might need a bit of a signal boost. We can band together. And so yeah, that one is good. And the other one that I'm really looking forward to that comes out a little bit later in the month is the third book in the City of Brass trilogy, Empire of Gold. Kingdom of Copper. Yes, Empire of Gold. I'm always like, it's gold, but what's the other one? So yeah, Empire of Gold is the other one that I'm super pumped about.
Yes, for me, June 2nd, definitely You Should Sing Me a Crown. It has like the cutest cover, like with this like
Yes.
just the fluffiest hair.
Love
And
it.
it's just like so cute. It's like prom themed. It's like super queer. It's just great. Please, You Should See Me a Crown. And then also, this one's technically not June 2nd, but it's also really pumped. It's still summer. Cinderella's Dead by Caitlin Barron. Love that one too. Like just super fantasy. Also Black girl with big hair, which I'm just loving this trend. That's the other one that I'm just like, yes, just give it to me.
So I have no idea what books are coming out when, because I have a 1-year-old and I live in Mauritius where books come out 5 months after everyone else. And actually you can't even get ebooks. They don't even like release at the same time. So my idea of what comes out when is completely different to everyone else in the world. That's the excuse that I'm going to die by. A book that I'm super excited is coming out at some point. Now, the thing is, the terrible thing is that this book might already be out in your side of the world, but where I live doesn't exist yet. It's I had to look it up because it is a very long title. The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water. And I believe it is by Zensho. Is it by Zensho?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds absolutely amazing. I'm on this gigantic kick of like Asian based, I completely lost you guys, I don't know where you've gone. Oh, there you are. Of this Asian based very low fantasy series that I've been watching, Nirvana in Fire, The Rise of the Phoenixes. I'm just obsessed, and it has just taken over my life. They have like about 150 episodes per, each of these series. And it's really made me, they're all based on books, which, I mean, millions of people around the world have seen these series, and no one has ever translated the books into English. So it really made me look around and be interested in different types of fantasy that was written by people who I hadn't read a lot of their stuff, because I've read quite widely in other nationalities, if you want to put it that way, because I'm not from America. So I'm actually in Mauritius, and Mauritius is next to Africa. It's technically a part of Africa, but we have a huge amount of influence from India. So we get a lot of French books, which are not necessarily even translated or sold in the US. So we get a lot of different influences, but the kind of the Asian fiction was really interesting to me. Something that wasn't necessarily based in India, although Star Daughter, I think, is coming out soon as well, and that looks amazing. So yeah.
Awesome. So if you guys can just reiterate one more time, your name, your book title, and obviously everything comes out on June 2nd. So that's when you can get, well, this will be posting on June 2nd as well. So today, we'll say. And Rosie, you want to go first? Okay,
so I'm Roseanne A. Brown. I wrote A Song of Wraiths and Ruin. This is shiny cover. And you can find me, I'm usually on Twitter at Rosie's Rambles. So that's ROSIES Rambles. And also Instagram, same handle, but I'm honestly usually on Twitter. Come shout about me at cartoons. I love cartoons.
So I am Bethany C. Morrow, the author of A Song Below Water. Can you see it better there? There we go. And I can be found on Twitter, I'm sorry, at BC Morrow. It's the same on Instagram, and I'm supposed to be getting better at Instagram, but I am a word person. So honestly, just come talk to me on Twitter. It'll be easiest for all of us. And yeah, I am talking about the CG in Gemini Man or something really actually useful and like important and about social justice and awareness and everything, or Bob's Burgers. It just depends.
We literally just had the longest conversation on Gemini Man like 2 days ago.
Yes,
3 a.m.
We gotta watch it now. We gotta watch it, please, everybody. We're gonna put together a rewatch of Gemini Man because we have to now. So we'll get details about that on Twitter.
Okay. I'm E.K. Johnston. I have Queen's Peril, which comes out June 2nd, aka today, and I can be found on Twitter at EK_Johnston. Same handle on Instagram, on Tumblr, EK no_Johnston, because they don't let you have underscores on Tumblr.
I'm Kester Grant, and I wrote The Court of Miracles, and you can find me on Instagram under Kester Kit Grant, where I post a lot of pictures of me drawing girl guides fighting Nazis in World War II. So if that's your thing, join me, guys.